All right. This is the case of Sarah Boone. It's my first rundown of murders that have to do with alcoholism. Excuse me. So, I didn't like the way the first video turned out. I decided to make another one. So, let's kick it off right now. On February 24th, 2020, in Winter Park, Florida, 42-year-old George Torres Jr., Jorge Torres Jr., however you want to pronounce it, was pronounced dead due to suffocation and blunt force trauma after being locked in a suitcase overnight by his girlfriend Sarah Boone. Before Sarah and George were heavily intoxicated the night before, George, thinking it would be funny or trying to play some type of stupid drunken game, or what Sarah called it, hide and go seek, got into the suitcase of his own will. It's speculated, due to the blunt force trauma that the medical examiner had found on George, that Sarah either pushed him down the stairs or beat him with her son Lucas's baseball bat while he was locked in the suitcase. Ultimately, George suffocated because he was left in the suitcase overnight due to Sarah not letting him out, and at 12 a.m. going upstairs to go to bed, sitting there for 30 minutes before falling asleep. The next morning, Sarah woke up at 11:30 a.m. She laid in bed for another hour until 12:30 p.m. before going downstairs, taking George out of the suitcase, calling her ex-husband Brian, then calling 911. While she was on the phone with 911, she was apprehensive to do CPR compressions on George. When paramedics arrived, they pronounced George dead. Sarah told police/detectives that she left the room thinking that George would be able to get out, went upstairs, sat in bed for 30 minutes before she accidentally fell asleep. Sarah's phone was then confiscated prior to the next day of her going into the investigation for George's death, before Sarah was brought back into the police interrogation, brought to the police interrogation for the first time. Police found 2 videos on Sarah's phone, 11 minutes apart, taunting George while he was locked in the suitcase begging for his life. Sarah was obviously drunk in the video, was telling George all types of shit. The first thing she says in the video is, "For everything you've done to me, for everything you've done to me." She repeats it twice. He says, "I can't breathe." Then she tells him, "That's how it feels when you choke me." Then when he's saying Sarah, she's telling him, "That's my name, don't wear it out." He calls for her again, tells her again that he can't breathe, before she says, "Fuck you," and then laughs at him pretty much the whole time while he's pleading for his life, saying that he can't breathe. Sarah was arrested after the interrogation, in which she said, and I left this part blank because I'm going to go back and watch the interrogation for the 3rd time so I could count how many times she tells the detectives that it was not intentional. Sarah is still waiting to start her trial for manslaughter because she's on her 6th lawyer due to constant berating and name-calling and belittling of her lawyers, thinking that they're not doing a good job. So all of the lawyers cited irreconcilable differences, saying that they couldn't properly defend her due to all the shit she was talking on them. Cool. I'm doing better than I did the first time. So I wrote down like 10 notes that had to do with all this shit, or had to do specifically with her alcoholism leading up to the point of his death and her basically committing manslaughter on him. So the first note that I wrote was that her husband Brian divorced her due to her drinking and constant cheating on him, and basically her just shitting all over Brian all the time because he's a fucking straight ass beta. So second one was Brian was pretty much her bitch And not only did he pay her alimony, but he cared to her every whim and was on her beck and call. So whenever she would call him anytime, he would have to go do something for her. And if she was supposed to go pick up Lucas or do something specific, and Brian didn't call this grown-ass woman twice every hour to remind her about it, and she forgot, she would berate Brian and basically blame it on Brian for not reminding her that she had to fucking do whatever she had to do. Number 3, Brian was pretty much so abused and gaslighted that he was not surprised at all that George turned up dead due to her. And I think he was pretty much abused, or just that's his personality in general, to the fact that he was almost in denial when he was talking to the detectives about all this. Number 4, Sarah didn't take good care of her son, let alone herself, but she had split custody with Brian, and they were supposed to share days that they would have him. And on the days that she was supposed to take care of him, Brian would have to repeatedly call her just to make sure she wasn't so drunk that she'd be able to pick him up and spend time with him. And then when she did spend time with him, or he was over at her house, she would call Brian half the time to come pick Lucas up, because her and George were so drunk and they'd be fighting and stuff. She wouldn't want the son to be around. So 5, George and Sarah used to beat the shit out of each other every time they got drunk, and both were arrested multiple times for domestic violence. Well, she might have just been arrested once, but I think that has a lot to do with the fact that George is a male, and not only are you not really supposed to, well, I'm not going to say not really, you're not supposed to put your hands on a female anyways, especially for any reason, let alone being drunk. But, you know, Sarah's the one that instigated most of that shit, and George didn't want to press charges on her, even if she hit him prior to him hitting her. 6, Sarah was weaponizing her restraining order that she got against George. Every time she would invite him over, she would invite him over, and then whenever he'd do something that she didn't like, she would call the cops and say that he was over there. Kind of almost make it seem like he was stalking her, even though she was the one that invited him over. 7, Sarah was an asshole to her neighbors, to her landlord, and the property manager, and would often get handsy with one of the property managers to the point where he said he didn't want to deal with her anymore, and that he basically pushed the responsibility of the property manager talking to her and telling her to cut her shit off on the other property manager, who was a female, because he didn't want to get involved with her bullshit. 8, Sarah had went to therapy with Brian before getting divorced, but refused to admit that she had a problem or that she was an alcoholic. And Brian pretty much enabled her the whole fucking time they were together. So he didn't make it any better. George's brother beat the shit out of him prior to his death because he had put hands on Sarah. And that leads me to my last note, which was basically Sarah told detectives she was afraid for her life by retaliation from George's family because they already didn't like her. So I'm going to make a second part to this where I basically go over the notes and the whole rundown and explain why all of this shit is so absurd and how everything turned out the way it did for the specific reason of her being an alcoholic. The only thing I wanted to say was that whether it's intentional or not, you can't kill somebody when you're drunk or cause their death and say it was unintentional and get off of the consequences, because that's why people that drink and drive and kill people get convicted or get charged with manslaughter all the time. So I'm going to make a part 2. If you like this, try to follow me, see if you could watch the other video, put some comments in the comment section, and we can have a little chat about it. Like I say at the end of all my videos, don't drink and drive. Don't drink, period, because it could cause you to do stupid shit like Sarah did to George. So have a good day, and I hope you like this video. Thanks.